Well, hey, North Bar Community Church, Pastor Luke here with another episode of First Looks. And we are continuing on in our series through the Gospel of Matthew, the series that we're calling The Way of the King. And we are today in Matthew chapter 5, beginning in verse 17, going through verse 20. So just a small section here, which I like what you can do with Scripture when you vary the lengths of passages that you preach from. And so earlier on in this series, to kind of set for us some of the primary themes of the book of Matthew that we're able to trace through multiple stories. When you look at them together in unison, you see certain themes within Matthew's gospel, and these are themes that would carry throughout the rest of the gospel itself. And so that's one of the goals that we had in the first few messages in the book of Matthew. Again, trying to see some of those broad brush strokes of Matthew's motifs that he's weaving into his gospel. But then there's also something really beneficial and helpful at slowing down and taking small units of text, just a couple verses at a time, and thinking deeply about them, meditating upon them, considering a few verses within the greater context of the Sermon on the Mount in this particular occasion, and within Matthew's gospel, within the New Testament, within the Bible as a whole. And so that's always just a helpful way to interpret text in those kinds of concentric circles of context outward. So with that, we're going to be looking at 4 verses here that are really about Jesus and the law. Now, much more needs to be said to qualify all that, but we'll kind of look at that in due course here. And then, of course, we'll be just taking this text and the things that I'm sharing with you here, and we'll have to mold it into a sermon. So, with that, maybe just by way of reminder, we had Sermon on the Mount, which is chapters 5 through 7. We had Beatitudes, we had that in 1 through Matthew 5 verses 1 through 12. And we have salt and light in Matthew 5, 13 through 16. And so that's what leads us up to verse 17. And it's helpful to have this kind of maybe just reminder of what Jesus has said thus far in the sermon. He's painted for us the portrait of the citizens of his kingdom who are poor in spirit, who mourn, who hunger and thirst for righteousness, who are meek, who are pure of heart, who are merciful, those who are persecuted. He sets forth this vision, this picture, this portrait of a kingdom citizen. He talks about what happens when those citizens are situated within the darkness of this world. They're like the preservative of salt, and they're like the illumination of light. And now he's going to kind of transition from his introduction, which we could maybe call that the introduction, everything leading up to verse 17, and beginning in 17, we start to enter into the body of the message, and you'll see that there's I'm going to try and remember. What is it? It's chapter 7, and it goes until, where does it go? Until, maybe it's 12. I think it might be 12. So let me just kind of put that off to the side here. Let's go right there. So 5:17 to 7:12 form an inclusio, making up body of sermon. So an inclusio is when you have a clear bookending of a unit of thought, and the bookending is with identical phraseology or a continuity or there's symmetry. There's a symmetry between the beginning and the end of an inclusio that helps identify a singular kind of unit of thought. And so what we have kind of for the inclusio here is, do not think about law and prophets. And in 7:12, we have, so whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. And so it's the Matthew's use or quotation of law and prophets phraseology that indicates a potential, I should say, potential inclusio bookending. Okay, so there we go. Let's look at this now. Jesus says, do not think that I have come. So this is purpose statement. Do not think that I've come to abolish. And so this Greek word is dismantle or tear down the law or the prophets. Now, it's also maybe really important for us to acknowledge that law and prophets, let me change that up again. Law and prophets is a way of talking about all the OT scriptures. Okay, so the OT scriptures were called the Tanakh, with T and K. Right there is your letters that form the acronym of T. Torah, which is 5 books of Moses. You have, after that, you have the N, the Nevi'im, which is the prophets. And then you have the Ketuvim, which is the writings. So that's kind of how the Hebrew Bible is divided up. You've got the Torah, the Pentateuch, the first five, Genesis through Deuteronomy. Then you have the Nevi'im, the collection of the writings of the prophets, and then you have the Ketuvim, which is the writings, most notably the Psalms. And so the first book of the writings is Psalms. It's the first book of the Ketuvim section. Why do I highlight that? Because you will see the New Testament referring to the Old Testament in a variety of different ways. Sometimes it will be referred to as the law and the prophets. Sometimes it will be referred to as just plain the law. Sometimes it will be referred to as the writings of Moses or books of Moses. Sometimes you'll see it as the law and the Psalms, and so you'll see kind of sometimes just different combined terms that all would have been uniformly understood as a reference to the Old Testament as a whole. So you can see that throughout the Gospels for sure. Even within Matthew, you have different ways of using one or two of these terms to refer to the whole thing. So the law or the prophets is a reference to then the Old Testament. And this is important. Whoa, what am I doing? Some of you who have been watching these for a while, you know that I have a bad habit of writing while I'm thinking about something else and having all kinds of things be written down, typos and stuff like that. So this is a reference to the Old Testament. So Jesus says, "I have not come to dismantle the Old Testament." That might be a paraphrase that we could do. Let me go ahead and maybe give us a paraphrase. Here. Yeah, there we go. So paraphrase. Jesus did not come to tear down the Old Testament. Okay, he says, rather, I have not come to abolish them, rather, but to fulfill them. To fulfill them. Okay. So, fulfill is the Greek plerao, which does mean to fulfill, to fill up. Now, here's what's unique about this is plerao, fulfill, is the word used 10 times so far in Matthew's Gospel. To describe Jesus' fulfillment of messianic prophecies. So, what that means is the word plerao, fulfill, is a very important word for Matthew. He's used it 10 times in the first 5 chapters here, and this is number 11 here. The 10 times prior to are, he came to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah, which says, that kind of thing. And so Matthew uses his terminology, especially his repeated terminology, very intentionally. This is not incidental. This is not to be understood outside of the context of all that Matthew has said thus far. Okay, so Jesus has not come to tear down the Old Testament, but to be the fulfillment of the Old Testament. Let's go ahead and just write this down. This is important for just the flow of thought here. Rather, Jesus came as fulfillment of all that the Old Testament was pointing to, consistent within Matthew's Gospel. Okay, so for truly I say to you, this is the Greek and Hebrew's both the same there. The Greek transliterates the Hebrew amen. Truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away. Let me just note that here, that we have two until statements. Let's go with a light blue. Until statement number 1, until heaven and earth pass away, until all is accomplished. So, until, again, we've got kind of bookending, and then in between. Okay. Now, what we have kind of being said in this phrasing here, here, until heaven and earth pass away, it's a phrasing that's essentially referring to the enduring nature of the law. And so this is and then until all is accomplished is the how would I say it, the eschatological significance of law. Yeah. Okay, so we have these two kind of bookending until statements that are important. When will heaven and earth pass away? Well, some commentators will say that this is a reference to it won't. It'll be renewed, and we'll have the new heavens and the new earth. And so they would say something like, the law will endure forever too. It'd be something akin to saying, like, until hell freezes over. It would be something akin to that, to where it's not going to happen. And the other side would say that this is not a forever, ever, ever statement, but rather until Christ brings about the consummation of all things statement, which would yoke itself a little bit better to the second until statement, which has kind of eschatological end goal significance, until all is accomplished, until the work of Christ is done in fullness. So suffice it to say, Jesus is making the statement here, that the significance of the law, how would I say it? What would I say? The totality of the law and is enduring. What do I? It's not landing with that. Well, let me just kind of break this down a little bit more, and maybe that'll just kind of help flesh it out. Okay, not an iota or dot. Your King James, I think, says jot and tittle. This is essentially, some would say your yod and your vav, which are the two smallest Hebrew letters. Iota is a Greek letter. So essentially, the dot of your eyes and crosses of your T's. The dots on your eyes and the crosses of your T's. That would be a way for us to kind of grab that in the English. Not the least stroke of any letter will pass from the law. So here's the thing now, okay, is look at how law and prophets is translated or interpreted up here. It's a reference to the Old Testament. It is consistent, I think, to interpret law within that same framework. Now, there's more to be said because next commandments are going to be talked about. But I think what we take from this is the significance of the law endures onward, in that it points to the fulfillment of the law, which is Jesus. So the law, and I would personally say, or OT, endures eternally. It could be end of age. I'm back and forth on that one. Let me phrase it differently. Endures onward. In its intended purpose of pointing to Christ. Its fulfillment. Okay. Ooh, okay, now we're going to start to get into some more tricky stuff here. So then it continues on. Jesus says, therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments, this word, relaxes, is from the root luo, which means to loose or untie. Whoever looses or unties one of the least of these commandments undoes it. Okay. And teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. So this is first off, let me just say, this is an undermining of authority and in significance, the authority and significance of OT from, we got the context here, from its intended purpose, which is to point to Christ. Okay? And teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Let me take that right there and highlight, point, still in kingdom of heaven. Okay, that's an important note here. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Okay, whoever does them and teaches them. Now, I'm going to make a statement and then I'll make my case in just a moment. Whoever does them and teaches them. Okay, so how do I want to does them will be addressed in the rest of Sermon on Mount. And Jesus is going to say what it looks like to do the commands, to see what the commands of the Old Testament were pointing toward, how to see it, receive it, embody it. And whoever does that, whoever walks in faithfulness to that, they will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. And so we'll have to deal with Matthew's reward verses in Scripture. And it's not just in Matthew, but Matthew is certainly where we're at right now. Okay. And then we have this last verse right here that's really significant for us, to land us in back in the gospel. Here it is. For I tell you. Okay, and we had truly I say to you, up a little bit ahead. It's just another strong statement here when he prefaces it this way. Unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees. The righteousness of The righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees was it was meticulous. It was very, very literal. It was behavior oriented. Meticulous, literal, behavior oriented. And so who is going to do better than the scribes and Pharisees at keeping the quote unquote letter of the law? Let me add that in there. It was letter of the law. Jesus says, unless your behavior, the letter of your law, exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Okay, strong statement. So let me just kind of pair these two together and say point not in kingdom of heaven. Now, how do we do that then? How then can we enter kingdom of heaven? Can you be a better lawkeeper than the scribes and the Pharisees? Jesus assumes that all of his hearers will respond by saying, absolutely not. Then, enter not by what you do, but by who you are, based on how do I want to phrase this? But who you are based on how you know Christ to be all that the scriptures point to. It's about who you are, who you've been transformed to be, who you've been transformed into. And you'll see that as we talk about anger. Look, it's not about if you murdered a guy or not. It's about what's in your heart. It's not about if you committed a literal adultery or not. It's about what's in your heart. It's not based on if you said, I swear on my mama's grave. It's about what's in your heart, because your heart reflects the transformation that only happens when you know Christ as King and Christ as Savior, Christ the Messiah, who came to fulfill all that the prophets and the law and everything was leading up to Jesus, what he came to do. Remember, even though we're hearing Jesus talk about the law right here, and we'll hear him say more things about what it looks like to be a citizen of his kingdom. While we talk about all of that, Matthew is working toward a progression that culminates in the cross. The cross. And we can never interpret anything that we find in the gospel apart from the looming cross in which Christ bears the weight and guilt and punishment of sin. And so that's what guards us from legalism, from a go and do apart from who you are in Jesus. Your purpose and your responsibilities and how you are to live, all of that flows from an identity that you have in Jesus and in Jesus alone. So that's all being teed up here. It's 4 verses, but we'll have more than enough to say in one sermon's time. And so I'm excited for it. It'll be good. And I love you, church, and I'll see you Sunday.